God of War 2018 came in with a new style of gameplay and storytelling, and completely revitalised one of PlayStation's oldest series. It was a shock to many when we found out this new Norse saga wasn't getting a full trilogy, as many, including myself, previously expected. Instead, this Norse era of the God of War franchise would be finishing with just 2 games, a duology, and the second game, God of War Ragnarok. Like the previous game, Ragnarok came out to high critical praise for its story and characters, its world and level design, and especially its combat, as well as even higher sales, setting a record for opening weekend of PlayStation's first party. The hype to Ragnarok is like few things seen, and if you're around the gaming space, almost impossible to ignore. But one question remains: did Ragnarok live up to the hype, continuing and elevating what needed to be after 2018, and telling a fitting conclusion to these characters and their journeys? Of course, there are lots of videos going through and analysing God of War Ragnarok. I'm sure many more to come, but I just wanted to let this be my own personal feelings, as someone who loved 2018, and that got me into the rest of the franchise, that I now love equally. Ragnarok is a significantly bigger game, going through all the 9 realms, a longer story, more side content, more characters and arcs for them. This included with increased variation in gameplay scenarios, and this makes this the question that men for centuries have been desperate to know the answer to. Is bigger really always better? Jumping into the combat of Ragnarok, it truly is a sequel and continuation of 2018's. It still has the same third-person over-the-shoulder type gameplay, with precision such as a Souls game being the focus, but also with a faster hack-and-slash style built into it, equally emphasizing speed and precision. What existed in 2018, but I feel is even more important here, is how to build Kratos using the different types of effects against enemies. In 2018, there was very clearly a best armor set. Whereas in Ragnarok, especially in the late game, it's much more about what sort you want to play with as Kratos, whether a strong emphasis on defense and absorbing hits, wanting increased stun effects on enemies, or prioritizing runic and cooldown to repeatedly use the weapon's power sets, or even status effects such as poison. These different choices all come from the RPG light aspect throughout the game, finding, crafting and upgrading different armor sets, as well as handles on weapons. This truly gets you to play Kratos how the player wishes to, and is rewarded likewise from going above and beyond within the 9 realms, fighting perilous enemies and discovering every corner of these worlds. Of course, what makes this combat so memorable is the weapons, and the 2 main ones return here. Firstly, the Leviathan Axe again is a fantastic close quarters melee weapon and a ranged weapon, where all of the praise on how great feeling the axe here is just as applicable in Ragnarok. Some of the movesets are different though, and I didn't quite enjoy the extended R1 move as previous. Such in 2018 where the axe would hit the enemy directly in front of you very fast. In Ragnarok it has a path of ice on the ground in front of Kratos. There is significant difference though. Weapons have a limited short upgrade of their status effect, so the Leviathan Axe holding L1 uses the axe Frost and is more likely to freeze enemies. The Blades of Chaos, Kratos' original weapon from the very first game, returns right from the start here. And while many of the skills reset, explaining that Fimbulwinter had ruined most of their magic, armor and upgrades they previously had, the base weapons are here. The blades always felt good, but not great compared to the axe in 2018. I feel they're elevated here. They feel faster in general, and more useful with the existing moveset. Kratos' rage and furiosity really comes out in these weapons linked to that of his past. There is a third weapon here too, which is very narratively important. The Dropnir Spear is forged in Svartalheim by the Lady, with the ring the Holder brothers made to impress Odin. The spear is thematically important, as Kratos describes so elegantly. It is the first weapon a Spartan learns to use. As well as, there are multiple other references to the game Ghost of Sparta, such as Kratos talking with Freya about Deimos, which makes me think that Eric Williams is rather fond of this game. The spear in combat is interesting, as it's an infinitely cloning weapon, with a very unique ability to implant the spearheads within or around enemies and then explode them. I feel in a lot of cases with this combat system, the blades are a great close range weapon and a serviceable range weapon, while the spear is a great ranged weapon and a serviceable close range weapon, while the axe is great at both. It is good to see Kratos' arsenal expand here and offers enough difference to be individually useful. Relics are here to replace the talisman, and I found these to be a significant upgrade. Not only are a lot gathered from defeating the berserkers, but they're also significantly more useful, having ones that can deal out damage themselves, as well as the more traditional stat boosts. Rage returns here, but there are different options. Fury, which is the same as 2018, a cooldown with Kratos using his fist to deal out damage, Valor, which returns health, and Wrath, which is a single very powerful attack. I personally switch between Valor and Fury, and I would argue Valor is more useful, but I found Fury to be most enjoyable. Boss fights are a huge improvement in this game. From the semi-bosses such as the Huntress, Drekkies, Dragons, and the like, to full ones such as different characters, Heimdall, Thor, Odin, Garm. They're memorable and enjoyable. A significant criticism of 2018 was the fact that there were minimal boss fights and the pseudo-bosses were almost exclusively trolls, which in fact, the troll fights in this game are completely optional. I found these to be incredibly memorable, dealing with all the creatures in this mythology and how they change depending on the realm and location. Companions return here, and since it's not just Atreus, there are different movesets for each. Both Freya and Atreus have the ability to switch between sigil and shock arrows, but they also have their own skills as well as different ultimates. And of course you can't not talk about the biggest change, playable Atreus and his own combat system. It's built on the back of Kratos's, and he's significantly faster and more agile, doing quicker moves and spins, and his own weapon being a bow relies much more heavily on ranged attacks. The bow feels a lot like Kratos's spear, a great ranged weapon and a serviceable melee one. Atreus gets his own companion through each dwarf for a little bit, but mainly a sentient sword, Ingrid, who, when I first saw in a cutscene Atreus get, was very excited to see use a melee weapon properly, with an agile, sentient sword seemed perfect for him. But alas, I was disappointed. She was only used to fill the slot of a companion, but Ingrid was very useful, and I even grew to like her as a character. The bow is still interesting though, being able to switch between sigil and shock arrows and then having a cooldown on those compared to the standard ones. Atreus also has his own rage mechanic, the ability to transform into a wolf, which was always a joy. I feel that Kratos' combat system is so clearly an upgrade here. It's not drastic, but it feels so much more refined, more purposeful and has better flow, while also having a wealth of new options to pick from that never take you out of the experience and also add to it, especially with these new boss fights. As for the Atreus sections, it's largely built off the same system with some significant tweaks, which while honestly it works better than it has any right to, I feel just doesn't go quite far enough to make it its own unique ability. Maybe it's my bias, just not being as interested in ranger characters, but I feel like the system was very bare bones, and I kept waiting for something, mainly expecting a new weapon, that would make it all fit perfectly, and it just really never eventuated. Puzzles are in an interesting spot compared to the 2018 counterpart. It's still based on the same core system of being designed around the weapons, whether it be the axe, the blades, the spear, and the different types of magical arrows. The axe and blades are very similar to 2018's, both respectively using the frost ability to freeze things and flame abilities to burn things. The new weapon, the spear, is used to slot the spear into marked sections where Kratos is able to grab and swing up and or over, as well as slot multiple spear points into, say, a rock and then blowing them up, destroying said rock. There are two new types of arrows. The shock arrows work the same ones as the last time. Instead of blowing up red sapling, they now blow up marked cyan coloured objects, which can be found in more places. The main difference in puzzles here, I would say, is that of the sigil arrows. These purple based arrows can be used to amplify other abilities, such as leaving the frost on a section after Kratos has recalled the axe, or using a chain of them to create a fiery explosion to reach an area Kratos' blades can't. I both found these a welcome addition in part, as they definitely require the most thought. I feel like they're not perfectly implemented though, and I felt particularly lining up a section of these sigil arrows to create one that would work and one that wouldn't, wasn't clearly defined and seemed to be pretty arbitrary whether it actually would. Also, different realms have different versions of puzzles. For example, in Alfheim there are reflective stones everywhere which can bounce the axe across different areas to reach a destination, or in Vanaheim needing to change between night and day to access the different areas. Overall, I found the puzzles in Ragnarok to be a bit of a step up. They're generally more varied, less repetitive, and require a bit more thought. Not a huge amount though, as it feels like a natural, small step up. A lot of contention, particularly around the puzzles, is the nature of companions helping out. It's very common for Mimir, Atreus, and Freya to point out solutions to these puzzles after only 30 seconds of attempting it. I think that this is naturally the best way to help people who otherwise would be stuck, and I appreciate its inclusion. But with all the accessibility options that this game has, I really think that being able to pick a time frame to give the player more chance to work it out themselves, and even the ability to disable it entirely, would be the correct step here. A significant difference between 2018 and Ragnarok is the realms and their layout. In 2018, we only had access to 5 realms, with Midgard taking up the largest majority of side content. Each of these realms were only accessible through Tyr's temple and took quite a long time to travel between them. In Ragnarok, firstly, all 9 realms are accessible here, and they are all done exclusively through the Mystic Gateway, being able to travel between any found gateways between any realms. This also has another significant upside. Exploring the other realms always had to, at least start around Tyr's temple. This way, there's much more freedom in different areas of these realms to explore. For example, in Svartalfheim, Vanaheim, Niflheim, Jotunheim, we don't go anywhere near Tyr's temple in these realms. Also, while in the last game, Midgard and the Lake of Nine and the sections around them took up the bulk of the side content. In here, there are multiple realms of similar size and amount of side content as just Midgard in the last game. Not every realm though, as Asgard is exclusively linear. Jotunheim is mostly, as well as Niflheim and Muspelheim only having minimal amounts. But Midgard, Svartalfheim, Vanaheim and Alfheim all have significant amount of areas with side content to explore. And with this side content, many of it is just the same as previous games. Odin's ravens exist to destroy, legendary chests exist to get gear, Nornir chests to do some light puzzle solving and upgrade health and rage, lore and artifact to explore more about the stories of these worlds. I do appreciate all this content, but especially with this being a God of War game, I appreciate the focus on this combat with a bunch of new side activities throughout the realms. Berserker gravestones are the replacement for the Valkyries from 2018. Finding a gravestone and inserting the hilt of a sword sparks a unique boss fight for Kratos to take down these challenging and varied enemies. And in a story sense, their motivation from Ymir and ties back to mistakes he made long ago. These don't feel as special as the Valkyries though. The Valkyries in 2018 were in these secret chambers with the build-up of going down the elevator with the motionless Valkyrie waiting for the challenge is so much more memorable than these. But even if in a story aspect it isn't as interesting, in a gameplay aspect I think they're about on par. Draga holes are found throughout the realms. These are also challenging fights against particularly strong Dragas, as well as some minions. As well as this, there are 2 side activities that become available after completing the sections in the story. After Helheim section, Hell's Tears are available throughout the realm. I found these really narratively fitting, going through and taking care of these with Atreus as he's the reason they exist. As well as the remnants of Asgard, with the Einhjar scattered throughout the realms after Asgard's destruction. Svartalfheim is the first realm Kratos and Atreus travel to in the story, and it's one of the most diverse. Opening in the wetlands, we're greeted to using the boat to soar through the sunny rocks and marshlands, with geysers and old dwarven architecture, before reaching the very first exploration of an actual civilization in the dwarven city of Nidavellir, which our very own dwarven friends Brock and Sindri are fond of. I was really interested to see towns and cities and people living their lives, as the world in 2018 felt desolate of them. And while Nidavellir is certainly an interesting place visually, it lacks any sort of proper population, with the excuse being that the dwarves are scared of outsiders so they hide in their homes. The main section of Svartalfheim though, is the Bay of Bounty, which is reminiscent of the Lake of Nine previously, going in around the boat to different shores around the bay, doing faves and side content. It's sunny and a much warmer, vibrant environment though. And the side content here, particularly the favors, is based around Mimir. As it's explained, Mimir helped Odin practically enslave the dwarves, and obviously has a lot of regret and shame based around that. Thus, Kratos and co. destroy several mining rigs and free a large monster that Mimir in his youth had chained up to extract its oil, which Mimir rightly points out he now knows how it feels to be a prisoner. Svartalfheim is diverse though. We visit mountaintops with beautiful vistas, delve deep into mines with almost endless tunnels, a quarry extracting resources needed for dwarven craftsmanship. Each area in Svartalfheim feels so different, yet comes together so elegantly, fitting like puzzle pieces to create a unique realm in its own right. The second realm visited is a return to Alfheim. And in the first mission back, we make our way to the old location of the Temple of Light from the first game, but this time from the other side around. While in 2018 we were greeted by the beaches of the Lake of Nine, this time it's the rock and cliff faces, and even upon coming into the temple, it is very different looking due to being taken over by the Light Elves in this game, a direct consequence of Kratos and Atreus' actions in the last game, where they thought they were helping the good side, but it's very much apparent that in this war there is no good side, and both committing horrible acts for control of this power. It makes a visually very different temple though, where before it was overgrown with Dark Elves' hives, it's much more floral and reflection stones all over the place. What's more interesting about Alfheim though, is that travelling away from the temple, and what's revealed is a great desert known as the Barrens. Here we travel by sled, carried by 2 creatures. What's really interesting about the side content in Ragnarok is how different it is framed to 2018. In 2018, the exploration was a character trait of Atreus, wanting to get out and explore the world he'd been hidden away from for so long. With Kratos, more focused on their journey, but going along finding useful items along the way. Here this is flipped. Atreus seems much more concerned with the prophecy, Ragnarok, Tyr, and whatever other objective is along the way, while Kratos is the one generally instigating the side content, and as Mimir points out in A Favour in Alfheim, is because Kratos wants to spend time with Atreus. He clearly has fond memories of their adventures together before and wants to continue them. This is during a particular quest, about freeing a giant jellyfish-looking creature into the sky, as Atreus can sense its pain, which once freed quiets the sandstorm, which allows Kratos and Atreus to explore different sections of the Barren. With the jellyfish beautifully flying in the skybox above, Alfheim can be returned to later with Freya though, and explore another section of the Forbidden Sands, and this area is interesting in another way. Firstly, we learn that there is a second jellyfish, and freeing that one allows the two to essentially mate, and upon returning to Alfheim later, the sky is full with little baby jellyfishes flying everywhere. But also, particularly learning the history of Alfheim and the connection to Freya's brother, Freyr. The elves were originally once united, but once the light was discovered, the elves separated into eternal war between the light elves who want to use the light, and the dark elves who want to protect it from being used. Freyr is a herald of both sides, as he is the first ever person they saw survive the Lake of Souls, and thus there are monuments built to him and is the only person who could reasonably unite them. Jotunheim is another returning realm, although much expanded. While there isn't really a lot of freedom to explore outside of the main quests, we get a lot within the linear sections as Atreus. Starting in the Ironwood with a thick and dense forest with seemingly, as it's appropriate, giant flora to explore over, before exploring the lakes of reddish colour to gain berries, the barrenness of the brown and yellow Valley of the Fallen, showing how desolate it truly is, and the darkness of Angrboda's grandmother's house. Jotunheim is of course very important to the narrative, but it's important to show this realm isn't and wasn't just an abandoned home of the giants. There is life here and diverse environments and could be home again were they to return. Vanaheim is another of the new realms to explore, and the largest realm in this game. It's home of Freya and the other Vanir gods, such as Freyr, and really emphasises the Vanir v Aesir conflict, how much worse the Vanir have been because of it. Starting the journey, we see the overgrown ruins and forests, with deadly flora and fauna before making our way to Freya's camp, to really emphasise the effect of the Aesir. The resistance here is tiny, only existing of Freyr, Hildisvini, Brigga, and the 2 elves, as well as the dwarf Lunda. This is the entire resistance of an entire realm against the Aesir, and any other Vanir are nowhere to be found. The quest continues towards an abandoned village, hollowed out and taken over by the Anyahar, and Freya's temple likewise in ruins. The effects of the Aesir and Odin are all over Vanaheim. This realm seems to largely exist to emphasize the disastrous effects of the Aesir and Odin. What was clearly once a realm thriving is now a shell of its former self. The game presents a lot of healing for this realm though. The first is a favour to do with Freya, but I'll argue that it is so important it should have been part of the main story, which also opens up a new side area, the River Delta, where there's beaches and coves here to explore. There's also Goddess Falls, the site of the wedding between Freya and Odin. Here is where Freya is able to face her past and dislodge and regain her ceremonial sword. This quest is so important, as it is to mirror Kratos and help put their differences aside. Freya being Odin's wife and essentially betraying her people and her realm to join the Aesir, even though it was done with the intention of keeping peace, is her destruction of Olympus, the thing that caused the downfall of her world. The sword is to mirror Kratos' Blades of Chaos, the weapon representing their past, but that they would both rather forget, but have to embrace and accept to push forward. Vanaheim has a second section too in the main story, with Atreus. It's also used to bring back the wolves Skull and Hati to chase the moon and the sun to bring the dawn and the dusk. This is more than just a story moment. It has really significant gameplay importance, as there are shrines throughout Vanaheim Kratos can call either of the wolves to either bring day or night, changing how the environment looks, but also making areas more or less accessible. This is particularly important to an area known as the Crater, a huge section of the game that is only purely side content, and has a bunch of unique side content here as well. Firstly, this area again reinforces the healing of Vanaheim through Kratos, as this area is initially desolate, with great caverns everywhere, before Kratos is able to free the water that has been dammed up, bringing life back to the area. But there are also now more opportunities for traversal. There's so much unique side content here, particularly ones that involve, say, the dragon hunts, which are obviously dragon boss fights, and what's so great about these is how varied they are. Going up against huge, giant, powerful lizards, or even glistening skyward serpents. As well as the epic hunts, and very memorable for me were the stags of the 4 seasons. Each one representing a different season, and bringing them back to Yggdrasil, the world tree for Retrospective. In this area you also find out more about Faye's history, which is really rewarding, particularly when done with Atreus. Asgard is the only absolutely purely linear realm, as it's only explorable through Atreus, as after the main story it is destroyed. Atreus first goes to Asgard to see Odin, and we learn a bit about the Aesir here, the refugees from Midgard, to give us the impression that Odin isn't perhaps as bad as Freya, Mimir, and everyone from the previous game claims. But this has changed when it's learned they were only there to help them during Ragnarok, and sacrificed at that. The world is beautiful and serene, seemingly untouched from the effects of Fimbulwinter, scaling the huge wall to then slowly descend to the town below. It's very Viking Norse inspired, largely made out of wood and huts in a similar style. In fact, the ruins of Vanaheim and the Temple of Light and the Dwarven areas are more impressive visually, but it gives and reinforces the characterization of Odin. He doesn't actually care about perception. He doesn't want a grand palace. He has a large but still just a lodge. It's not interested in him all that much in this world, and instead the knowledge, the mask of the rift can give him. What Asgard is really great for though is characters. Getting to spend time with Thor, Heimdall, Thrud, Odin and Sif creates a more clear picture of the war and the both sides that are fighting it, and how it's largely Odin's responsibility due to his single-minded obsession. I felt very attached to the Midgard from the last game, as it's obviously where you spend most of the time, and I enjoyed the variety of environments in that game. The Lake of Nine, the different beaches, the mines it could take you, the mountain, the forest path, and so many unique locations. Midgard here has disparatively felt the effects of Fimbulwinter, and we're still centered around Tyr's Temple and the Lake of Nine. Instead of boating around it, we're now on a sled with our wolves. The realm is largely used to feel the effects of Fimbulwinter. There isn't any population here, and the ones that are raiders using and looting whatever they can to survive, and treating others with cruelty. There are still interesting stories here. We learn of Mimir's love of Sigrun, and a lot about her backstory. The story of a lover's meal, which takes us to different realms to seek out the ingredients, which I've since learned is actually a homage to the developers of this game, who were a couple and one who tragically lost their life during development, a homage to him and their love. Returning to older environments, the 9 gateways, many of which are in ruin, Tyr's temple being looted, and the otherworldly possessions scattered throughout the lake. Freya's house and the abandoned Charlie. I feel it's the perfect level of there's still plenty to do and see in how this world has changed, but we don't spend too much time here, as the focus is on a lot of the other realms. Helheim returns in this game, and is largely linear. There is a minimal amount of side content here, which I think is for the better. But we do get to see more of this realm, and appear to be in a frozen over fortress that is huge and grand and much more interesting than the previous very same looking ruins. It still retains its very cold and desolate atmosphere, but we also get to see the giant hellish raven. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, returns, and this time has changed as the lava has pretty much engulfed Tyr's temple and completely changed the landscape around it. It's very reminiscent of the previous game, except here there is a section that is important to the story as well as the side content. As for the return of the Crucible, previously it was linear and now it's more varied. Having Norn-styled runes attached to doing different combinations of the 3 options grants different challenges. Overall, I think the endless form of combat is a great addition, although I do feel it's slightly repetitive this time, having to do the same 3 challenges again in different combinations over and over just to unlock different ones. Niflheim is certainly the most different looking realm from the previous game, even more so than Midgard. Here it is white and covered in what sort of looks like snow and ice, a more pleasant Helheim if you will. There's a section in the story for exploring these icy caverns, but the main content here is that of the ravens. It turns out the magically green glowing ravens that Odin controls, that Kratos has been destroying, are actually in a sense of imprisonment, and that destroying them is helping them, which in turns help out Kratos with gaining to unlock chests or rewards. This brings more to the previous system, where in 2018 it was just a collectible, and here there are tangible reasons for finding and destroying them throughout the realms. Also, there is a post-main story favour here, when an Asgardian prison has landed in Niflheim, and Kratos explores it to discover Tyr, the real Tyr. After this, he is available to find in all the different realms, just kinda hanging out. But I really dislike this narratively, as it felt like part of the purpose of Tyr's fake out was the fact that it was Odin the whole time. Tyr was dead, they needed a god of war Kratos to step up. I feel like it takes away from the overall narrative and characterization of Odin. Ragnarok's plot is expansive, travelling all of the 9 realms, 2 separate playable characters, and many other characters come in and out of this journey. So for this, I want to talk about the different segments of the story. One aspect we get to see is the resistance to Odin and the Aesir. This is largely expressed by a lot of the ally characters to Kratos and Atreus, but particularly the Vanir. We first start out finding who we seemingly think is Tyr. After all the stories, the fear from Odin, Tyr comes as a disappointment, a bumbling, scared man, clearly scarred and tortured, wanting more than anything to convince them to avoid war. This becomes clear why, as we find out this has been Odin in disguise the whole time, learning what this group wants to achieve, to be all-knowing in the events of happening within the realm. Odin's charade comes to a close, when out of frustration ends up killing Brock and revealing himself. This aspect is one of controversy. Many people enjoying it and others not so much. I quite like it as appealing throughout the rest of the game. Ultimately, I feel Odin as an antagonist and a villain lacks a lot of agency, but I feel his deception as Tyr just adds to his levels of manipulation of the people and world around him. The other, not in disguise members, are very clearly Freya, who acts as a secondary companion in this game. After the conclusion of 2018, I really wasn't too sure where we were going to get a friend or foe out of Freya. But even after Kratos' actions, Freya's kindness, revenge of Odin, and desire to free herself of the realm comes to play. This is first started by Atreus, secretly going to see her, but after refusing to kill Kratos, decides she needs him to free her bond of being trapped in Midgard, leading to Kratos and Freya going to Vanaheim to break that said bond. This mission is really important, because it allows Kratos and Freya to open up to each other, particularly Kratos' past having killed his own wife and daughter, and the situation with his brother Deimos. This brings a level of sympathy to him from Freya, and particularly an understanding. He killed her own child, knowing the pain that causes. The end of this segment, Freya comes to the understanding that Odin is the real villain here, and the one that caused Baldur's death, although she is not without blame. Through Freya and Vanaheim, we introduce the rest of the Vanir, or at least what's left of them. Freyr, her brother, has been head of the resistance. He's a disorganized guy, but trying his best to hold off as much of Asgard as he can. Brygr, a warrior who sacrifices himself for the others, but survives and then retires. 2 elves, a light and dark, in a relationship, which discuss how they've come together after seeing the pointlessness of their people's fighting. A dwarf friend of Brock's named Lunda, and Hildisvini, who was the boar that Atreus shot in God of War 2018. Near Freya's house. The purpose of most of these characters is to give the people that Odin is hunting and hurting a character, so that more than just revenge and dislike can fuel the player to sympathize with Kratos and the others. It's to see the extent of his influence, between the destruction of Vanaheim, the manipulation of the people of Midgard, the enslavement of the dwarves. It's to reinforce how Odin is ultimately an evil for this world, and the best way to do with this character. My issue is, these characters feel interesting on the surface, but nothing really underneath. Brygr is the only one that gets a dedicated favour, and the others just have optional conversations at the camp, and I believe it's really a result of timing here. I firmly believe this story is structured as a trilogy, with parts 2 and 3 wrapped up in this one game. Ultimately, it feels like when Ragnarok came about, certain things were prioritised and done fantastically, such as Freya's story, Odin's story, as well as Kratos and Atreus, but leaves others with a lot more to be desired and fleshed out. Of course, the other last group of characters are the Hulda brothers, our dwarven friends, Brock and Sindri. We learned so much more about these 2 characters in this game, particularly that previously Brock had died. Sindri fetched out 3 out of 4 parts of his soul, bringing him back, but he's still incomplete. Brock finds this out and forgives Sindri, but once he's killed by Odin, Sindri becomes inconsolable, clearly not bothered by mess anymore and being hostile to his own friends. As Atreus says, he thought of Brock and Sindri as family. But Sindri blames them for bringing Odin there in the first place. Sindri is so upset he lost his brother for the second time, but also, since Brock's soul wasn't complete, there is no afterlife for him, and Sindri ultimately feels responsible. The story for these two goes in the complete opposite direction to 2018. In the game, they weren't talking to each other, and it took Kratos and Atreus to bring them together. Well, this game reinforces the true bond and love they had for each other, despite their differences. Through Atreus, we see so much of the Aesir, the villain camp in this game, if you will. Firstly, we basically learn that Odin is a dick, who treats everyone around him terribly, but is great at commanding and manipulating them. Heimdall is also a dick. Just a dick. He really has no character other than being useful to Odin and treating everyone else like shit. Thor is a drunk and very depressed after the loss of the sons, and is constantly abused and manipulated by his own father, Odin. Sif, his wife, is furious at what happened to their son, and treats Atreus with contempt, and wants to keep Odin at an arm's length. Atreus does gain one friend here though. Thor and Sif's daughter Thrud, who is an ambitious warrior, wanting to become a Valkyrie and make her grandfather and the Aesir proud. Of course, after what happened to Magni and Modi, Sif and Thor aren't thrilled with this idea, and Sif certainly tries to stop it. But of course, we also learn exactly what Odin wants, why he has enslaved the dwarves, drove the Vanir to ruin, the Jotnar into literally giving themselves away. He, likewise to Atreus and Kratos, is scared of death. While Atreus and Kratos are in fear of each other's death, Odin is of his own, and particularly the fact that there is no afterlife for him, and he believes he's found out how to get his answer. A rift underneath his home, with part of a mask with engraving really only Atreus, with his magical gift of language, can decipher. He believes holds the key to all the knowledge he needs about the world and how to avoid his own death. Thrud put her trust in Atreus, which caused her in part to be blamed for releasing Garm in Helheim. While it's put a strain on the relationship, ultimately the kindness Atreus treats Thrud with is important in her struggle to accept the evils of her grandfather. Thor's story is rather tragic in a way, brought to drinking as a coping mechanism for both what happened to his sons as well as his treatment as nothing more than a dumb brute to punch whoever Odin sends him for. By the time Thor, like Kratos, decides to be better, not to be the monster Odin made him, he is swiftly killed by Odin, never getting to be the husband he should have to Sif, or the father Thrud needed. Atreus also has another interesting journey, that of him as his identity as Loki, and the prophecy as the champion of the Jotnar. Atreus, ever since the end of 2018, wants to know more about his giant heritage, and his destiny and identity as a Loki. This causes him to be quite rebellious to Kratos, finding all the Jotnar shrines in Midgard behind his back, and eventually, although accidentally, travelling to Jotunheim through his dreams, meeting Angrboda and discovering the truth of the giant. They aren't gone, but they aren't really alive either. Their souls trapped in marbles. Atreus, throughout his time at Asgard, tries to change his own identity, willingly being referred to as Loki, showing the duality to his feelings here. His destiny as a Norse god attempting to work with the Aesir, and being Kratos' son as Atreus. He is once more guided by destiny and prophecy here, as he learns about him meeting Odin, and at first is horrified before eventually doing it willingly. Atreus eventually, along with Kratos, decides to give this aspect up, still fearful of prophecy, but not letting it control him, and results in his ending of wishing to help the giants, but doing it on his own terms. In 2018, the relationship between Kratos and Atreus was the bedrock and core of that game, and that is likewise here. Ragnarok picks up roughly 3 years after the events of 2018, and we first see how Kratos, Atreus, and Mimir are dealing with Fimbulwinter in Midgard, using wolves with sleds, stopping raiders, Atreus using staves to protect their home, and fighting off Freya when they venture out of it. And the start of this game introduces some new important concepts to us too, and reinforces some old ones. Firstly, Kratos and Atreus have a much better relationship after all the years, but it's still not perfect, and both of them are ultimately being driven by the same emotion: fear. Seeing the prophecy from the end of the last game, Atreus is scared of what that predicted, and the death of his father. Meanwhile, Kratos isn't concerned about the death, but rather whether Atreus will be ready to survive after it. This leads to both having the opposite reactions. Kratos wanting to remain where it's safe and train Atreus to deal with the evils he knows will come for him, while Atreus wants to avoid the inevitable and seek out answers for how to change things, Mix this in with some teenage angst, a helpful dwarf, and another identity in Loki that has a destiny written, and Atreus has been taking a lot of this into his own hand, discovering more secrets about the giants and their prophecies from the Jotnar shrines, and pointing to one individual he believes will be able to help, Tyr. This fear and ultimately love for each other is what guides each of their quests. This game gives Atreus the ultimate agency, and I would say he's the one mostly responsible for pushing the events of this game forward. While you still majority play as Kratos, this is really how I see it, as Atreus' game. Mimir's advice to Kratos is that Atreus is going to walk his own path, so it's best to walk with him, which Kratos does. The first few missions and realms are guided by Kratos wanting to follow Atreus, which is also reinforced by the side quests of them simply wanting to spend time together. We first see how truly much Atreus wants to go out on his own, affect his own change, make his own choices, save his father. When he sneaks off with Sindri to go talk to Freya, while ultimately unsuccessful, I believe this conversation is what starts her on her path to peace with Kratos. The second is Atreus' albeit accidental time in Ironwood with Angrboda, which puts a significant strain on the relationship with his father, eventually causing Atreus to go off to Asgard to seek the answers, to find his destiny, to save his father. Kratos is very clearly hurt by this and tries to spend time in other ways, finding the Norns, building the Dropnir spear, and helping out the Vanir. Kratos only knows how to be practical. His reaction always is, close your heart to it. Let reason and logic prevail, not emotion. While Atreus can't help but let his emotion fuel him, and the people he cares about, Kratos, Brok, Sindri, and Angrboda, Thrud, all of them mean a lot to Atreus, and he can't close his heart to them, or even others such as Skolgia. The reunion between Kratos and Atreus is emotional. It's fueled by Atreus messing up, freeing Garm to cause havoc among the realms. He turns to Kratos, and Kratos, obviously angry and disappointed, helps Atreus. By doing it in this way, Kratos insists they must slay the beasts and to let Kratos have control of this situation. This doesn't work though, as Garm just comes back to life constantly. This in turn gives Atreus some agency, and instead of killing Garm, he places Fenrir's soul into him. Now an ally, Atreus has shown how helpful and integral his compassion and empathy is. This leads to a conversation the two clearly needed to have. The fear of their fate drove them apart. They cannot let it happen again. They need to trust each other, and Atreus even uses the line when Kratos tries to apologize for driving him away.
I am sorry.
Don't be sorry, Father. Be better.
Atreus is learning from Kratos, and we now know this line originates from Faye. They both decide that we will make our own destiny. They will do what's necessary, not because it's foretold, but because they must. Destiny is an important aspect of how much the narrative is fueled by it, and the prophecies appear to keep coming true. Before Ragnarok, Atreus and Kratos still have much to learn from each other. The death of Brok sees Kratos run away and hunt together before a deer running away brings into perspective what they are doing. They are running from their problems to lick their wounds instead of standing up and fighting back. There's a lot of great moments, such as the Valkyrie fight between Hurst and Mist, in which we see Kratos and Atreus both use their rage in sync, showing their father-son team dynamic in full force. Most importantly is when they reach Ragnarok. The night before, Atreus seeks to sleep in the same tent as Kratos, something I'm sure many teenage boys wouldn't want to admit, and come the dawn, come Ragnarok, Kratos sees the error in his ways. Close your heart to it is how Kratos learned to suppress his rage, who he was. He believed that was the cure to what he had been through, but he'd closed off too much to himself, the good emotions that were there too, which he sees in Atreus, particularly his empathy, and realized that was what he needed all along. That was the choice Kratos made to be different, to avoid prophecy. Atreus is ultimately given the decision between his father and between Odin and the knowledge. And obviously, after all this, he picks his father. The game ends with a rather bittersweet ending for these two. Atreus is ready to go off on his own to figure out how to bring the giants back. And revealed in the Jotnar Shrine, Kratos is able to see his next path. The Greek games are all about Kratos as the destroyer, him slowly but surely bringing down the gods of Olympus. Not without reason, sure, but he has for hundreds of years lived in infamy of his actions and ultimately ashamed of them and the destruction he caused. Throughout 2018 and Ragnarok, most of Kratos' character can come down to the quote, "We now know," first said by Faye, "Don't be sorry, be better." Kratos throughout this Norse saga has tried to be better, but has still resulted in much of the same issues. He kills gods. Between Modi, Balder, and Heimdall, it almost appears there's no end. This is reinforced by the Norns, the fortune tellers of Norse mythology, where they simply state nothing is certain, it's people's choices that are so predictable, they almost always pick what is going to happen. Kratos is killing gods due to his fear and rage, and even though it is more subdued than the Greek saga, he is an entirely different person. What's important from this storyline is how Kratos learns to be better from his son Atreus. Atreus represents and teaches Kratos the importance of how his emotions are not the bad things he should be avoiding, but rather embracing his empathy and compassion for others instead of the rage he has felt. This new path is about Kratos the Redeemed, the Builder, to create a better world for the people and gods in it, and with the destruction of Asgard and his new destiny to unite the rest of the realms and forge onwards to a new and better world. Which is really Kratos' whole arc in the Norse saga, struggling with who he has been, but to deliberately make the choice to be someone better. Kratos and Atreus both learn how to be better from each other. I do believe this story is overall great, with strong character development, big moments, and an interesting plot. But it has some hurdles and is so big it suffers a little bit under the weight of everything it's trying to do. The heart and soul of these games is Kratos and Atreus, their development and relationship, and I believe that here is as good, if not better, than the first game. Their meaningful journey of fear that forces them apart but ultimately brings them back together, and both learning from each other to be better. The most negative aspect I have in this game is twofold. It's the lack of character a lot of the Vanir have. They really feel like they're just there. Not having really extended sequences with them, or even dedicated favors, really hurts this aspect, especially with Freya's sacrifice at the end of the game. I felt very little because the game gave me very little to attach to him. Seeing more of Freya as attempting to be a leader or a bond with Freya would have gone a long way in this aspect, and give even more emotional resonance to the fight and why Ragnarok had to happen. The other aspect is really the lack of payoff. The fact that there are still going to be YouTube videos speculating who blew the horn after this game is really frustrating, as well as I didn't find the Jormungandr plot here all that satisfying. I liked the explanation, but it felt a bit more like a hand-wave inclusion rather than anything else, as well as many story aspects, particularly towards the end, feel incredibly rushed. It's almost comical how quick a change of heart, pun intended, Surtur has, and seeing him as an actual character for extended amounts of time would have given his eventual sacrifice much more weight and meaning, rather than just an exposition monologue. That's truly where I feel this game suffers in relation to 2018. 2018 had a handful of characters that I feel were given truly enough spotlight. Kratos, Atreus, Brock, Sindri, Freya, Mimir, Baldur all had compelling character arcs. That was an exception to my criticism of the game that Magni and Modi weren't given as much, but they served their purpose and had a powerful impact on characters in this game, which I feel makes up for it. The pacing of this game is just simply too quick to do all the characters justice, and the plot beats they have here, and it really feels like parts 2 and 3 squished into one, which I feel aspects of the story suffer because of that. Thor's arc was going in a really great direction, and I liked particularly the ending of changing who he was, particularly for Thrud, only to then be killed by Odin. The issue is we really get more time with Atreus and Thor rather than Thor and Thrud, and don't get to see their father and daughter dynamic all that much. As well as the narrative going in so many different directions, every previous God of War game had one single objective to focus on. This doesn't here, and I feel makes it feel more disorganized. I still think that the story of this game is incredible, because the emotional heart and soul between Kratos and Atreus absolutely land. Odin is a meaningful and memorable villain that stands really in contrast to the others in the series in a great way. It gives Kratos and Atreus plenty to do and to have their own agency, with satisfying conclusions to this saga, for particularly all the characters, Kratos becoming redeemed, Atreus going off on his own adventure, Freya helping Kratos put right the realms, Thrud taking up Mjolnir, Sif helping the Vanir. The only one with a mixed ending is Sindri, who I believe is a reflection of the old Greek Kratos, being overcome by rage and grief that he turns everyone away and to a darker path. I truly do love this game and this story. What it does for the characters I care deeply about, even if I can see the flaws in how it was delivered. God of War Ragnarok is a game that certainly delivers to all the hype, and in a lot of ways is a significant step up to its predecessor, through its combat, world design, and puzzles is bigger, better, and more complex. It keeps its core emotional and intimate storytelling between Kratos and Atreus as the heart of this game and this saga, and has really meaningful development for the two as well, as an extension to the other side characters, between Odin, Freya, Thrud, and plenty of others. I also feel like in my mind, when I picture Norse mythology, it's very much this adaptation that I'm picturing, in how these characters look, but especially in their mannerisms, and at least for me has become a sort of definitive version of these characters. God of War Ragnarok does suffer under the weight of its ambition. The pacing throughout the entirety of the story does have issues. There are aspects of it and characters that I feel are looked over and rushed in a race to get to the end. I feel this is significantly lessened by how much of a great job they did with the characters at the heart of the story. God of War Ragnarok does stick the landing, cementing this series and particularly this saga as an all-time great, while also giving a North Star forward in particularly where the characters of Kratos can go next. As for which mythology that will be or who will be joining him, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was a bit longer, but I had a lot of feelings on Ragnarok and feel like this game did a lot, so I wanted to talk through all of that. With the conclusion of Ragnarok comes the conclusion of the God of War saga, at least currently at the moment. I'm very excited for what other projects and series we can get to on this channel, and let me know what your thoughts are on Ragnarok in the comments below. Did it stick the landing for you or not? If you like this video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. Until next time, cheers and have a good one.